Danielle, thank
Hi,
you for,
Onyx.
how's it going? Thank you for joining
Good.
us. Thank you for joining us and being part of our FFCNation podcast. Uh, it's great to have you here and spend some quality time with us this evening and engage in a conversation with us related to all things faith, family, community, and nation. Thank you once again. How's your weekend been? Any fun activities that you guys had planned?
Well, that would have been with you. Um, and it was a very low key weekend compared to our usual. So it was nice. Uh, we filed our taxes yesterday, which I can't say was super fun. But other than that, had church today in the morning and really just got things done around the house. So pretty low key.
Yep. And for all my listeners and viewers, if it was not evident enough with Danielle's answers, she is my wife, and she has been a joy and a happiness in my life for the past few years, about 4 years of getting to know each other, a couple of years dating, and now we've been married for about 2 years. Um, Danielle, I just again wanted to take this time to just share a little bit about our dating life for a couple minutes. Uh, do you mind telling our viewers and our listeners how we met briefly?
Oh, okay. Um, so we met on a dating app called Coffee Meets Bagel. I had very little expectations going into using that dating app. And I guess I should have been a little bit more optimistic because I'm now married to the guy that I met on the app. But the first time that we actually saw each other, I was joining a Bible study that you were leading and
That's correct.
on the book of Ruth. And little did I know that when I hopped on that I would see a Hollywood Squares filled with your family members. So not only was it the first time seeing you, it was the first time seeing some of your aunts, your cousins, your sister, your parents. And I just saw in every square, Kuthru, 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 and immediately thought, what did I get myself into? But ended up being a really nice Bible study. And then you and I officially met up in person for brunch a few days later, and the rest is history.
The rest is history. Yeah, that was a unique way to get started. Specifically, that you just jumped on a prayer meeting, and again, it was fairly nerve wracking for me as well because I hadn't even gotten a chance to talk to you really in person or on the phone or even get to know what your voice sounded like. So I was like, I don't know how this is gonna go, but it ended up being great, and I'm grateful that you got a chance to listen in, talk about Ruth and the importance of what Ruth means to the lineage of Christ. Of course, yeah, it's thinking thinking back, it was a really interesting time, specifically going through right out of COVID and everything related to that and how it impacted just all the transition of Bible studies and everything going online. Usually that used to be in person, but that would have been interesting. Luckily, it was on Zoom, not you'd be in person. I was just kidding. um, well, thank you again for taking time to join us to talk about these important topics. If you've gotten a chance to listen to our prior podcast, I got a chance to engage with Anna Karamandla, who shared a little bit about the importance of therapy and how it can be a source of healing. And we talked a little bit about in the Bible, how did Jesus himself, in a way, share his words and use his parables and his teachings almost as a form of therapy as well. Um, and one of the conversations out of that was we wanted to see, I wanted to understand from her, how has a nuclear family, um, been impacted in America, specifically around some of the statistics I shared. We see um, a decline, unfortunately, in the amount of um, families that are complete. And when I say complete, I'm counting having a husband, a wife, and children, right, as a unit itself.
Mm.
And I wanted to kind of get some thoughts related to that with you, specifically as you and I are building our own, young and a young family, as we start, instilling some of these values and these um, teachings that we ourselves would ideally like to see in our children. I wanted to kind of get your perspective on what your thought is when I say, this belief of FFC Nation, complete nuclear families are foundational for building, future leaders within our communities.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think keeping the nuclear family together really helps children flourish, beginning in the home. And what you learn in the home in your very early years are so crucial in shaping who you become, because prior to entering your school age years, your family is where you develop some social skills, where you learn certain values. And if you don't have a strong foundation from there, once you start entering different peer groups who have also been
Mm,
influenced by their nuclear families,
mm,
then if you don't have a strong foundation going into that from what your family has taught you, you're a lot more impressionable um, by the people that you're surrounding yourself with, whether that be a good group or not a great group. But if you have a strong foundation, you stay true to yourself as you enter these new situations. And I think starting with a strong foundation sets people up for the most amount of success later on, because they're not swayed left and right
mm,
based on who they're around or what circumstances they're in, but they know what they hold as their truth and are
mm,
able to navigate through the world. They are able to be more resilient,
mm.
more stable through the difficult situations. And like I said, not as impressionable.
Yeah, yeah, that's well said. Yeah, I definitely feel that, especially with this culture that we're living in, there's a lot that has been infiltrating just the home and the different um, things that kids are exposed to these days, different ideologies that perhaps are not um, biblically aligned as much. So I'm just curious if you're able to expand a little bit from your own background. Um, how was your upbringing? What were your early childhood years like, and how did you yourself, um, you know, ensure that you stayed true to the person that you are today? And how did your background shape you to be where you were, or where you are? Excuse me.
Um, so that's a little tricky. I feel like I don't fit the normal mold of coming from a broken family, but I did. My early years, my parents were together. I have one sibling. We weren't terribly close, our family. Our nuclear was just the four of us, and then outside of that, we didn't have much connection with our extended relatives. Um, but I did have that mother and father figure growing up, and they really instilled respect, discipline, um, independence, resiliency, and just overall being a good, kind person. I, as far as an FFCN standpoint, my family was, um, we attended Catholic church. Um, but that's not something that was done super regularly. we became what we could now call creasters, um, that would only go on Christmas and Easter. I just didn't connect with the Catholic Church. So actually about at 8 years old, I had asked to stop going. And it was a little bit of a back and forth with my parents, but ultimately they, raised the white flag and just said, if you don't want to go, then you don't have to go. I did end up attending Catholic high school, which I got a lot from academically, not so much religiously. Still felt very disconnected to Catholic teachings, but always kept, my faith in God and knew that there was a higher power. Just didn't really have a strong basis for, what all of that meant.
Hmm.
But by the time I was 16, my parents had divorced, and it was a tumultuous time for me. Even growing up without them being divorced, it was very quiet in the home. It wasn't like this constant fighting back and forth, but it was almost just this eerie silence of people just avoiding each other, which has an impact as a child, like when you feel like you're walking on eggshells. So now, looking forward with you, we've talked about these things and how we hope to have open communication with our children for disputes to happen not in front of the children, to establish a strong foundation of Christianity within the home, to not even contemplate divorce. That's just not in the cards. We said that going into it, like that's a non-negotiable. It's just not. It's not in the realm of possibility. So, although I came from brokenness, it has helped show me exactly what I don't want to replicate for my own children.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, in Proverbs it says, train up a child in the way he should go. This is Proverbs 22:6, and it's one of our biblical standings on what we believe here at FFC Nation related to nuclear families and what children should be taught. Again, it's train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. So I think that ties in really well with kind of what you mentioned here, right? We're setting that standard related to the importance of staying together, the importance of working through conflict, right? Trying to figure out um, you know where you can be a better person so that you can continue to piece together any hurt and any issues that you may have, and ensure that as we pass these teachings along, they themselves, when they're older and are in relationships that are committed and married, that they realize that hey, if there's say like a bulb that's broken in my home, I don't destroy the home. Rather, I just fix the light bulb and kind of work from there. As you just kind of going back to your background a little, or excuse me, your childhood, when you said that there was a lot of silence, right, in the home. Can you explain kind of like what that meant, like what it felt like, perhaps why that might be in a way not healthy for um, future, for the children if they get into any type of conflict. I know we also hear that, oh, take time away and spend time in your own space, and that kind of creates some of that silence, right? Because you're now just putting yourself into an environment where you're no longer having a conversation, talking about things, but rather choosing to go independently, and that kind of separates maybe a collaborative effort together. So I'm just curious what your perspective on that is.
Well, I'll start by saying that I don't think space is a bad thing. I think that it has its time and place, especially if you're feeling emotionally charged in the moment. I think it's good to take time and space to calm down, to be able to have a productive conversation. But I think where my parents got to was a place of just complacency, where
Mm.
it just wasn't working. So instead of continuing to have the difficult conversations, they just chose to not engage. So it very different than just there being a disagreement and then someone maybe taking a walk or something. This was like, and who knows when this started? Probably when I was really young, but I only can remember these sorts of situations, about like 7 or 8 and older. So it's hard to say what years prior to that looked like in the home.
Yeah.
And how long it took to get to this point. But it was very evident that at a certain point, it was just cohabitating for the sake of the children versus trying to make the relationship work, which that's hard in itself, because children feel that too. And so some people would say, well, then wouldn't it just be better to just go your separate ways? And I don't think so. But they're also, you've pretty much gone your separate ways when you're just cohabitating. So there has to be active effort into resolving what the core issues are.
Yeah. Interesting you brought up the concept of cohabiting, right? That's another statistic that we've observed in the United States, specifically the cohabitation of two individuals. Um, Not only, I mean, in this example, it kind of felt that your parents were married, but then as things didn't necessarily pan out the way that they perhaps envisioned that relationship, it transitioned to cohabiting in the sense that they just existed for the sake of existence in a way in that
Mm-hmm.
relationship. What we're seeing, unfortunately, in the United States is this trajectory of individuals who are not married, individuals who are dating, individuals who, are getting into these relationships and cohabiting with them. And that's been on a rise. How would you say perhaps that creates an environment of incompleteness? Because I'm seeing some type of correlation here to what you're saying about cohabiting and what we're seeing as well related to what's happening out there in the culture. Does that create in your mind this sense of incompleteness?
Yeah, I think we're taught this biblically that it's not right to basically play house, that those situations are reserved for marriage. When you're kind of doing this test run, it is incomplete because you don't have the commitment of a marriage. So it's very easy to just have one foot in the house and one foot out the door and see it as a low risk endeavor.
Right.
But it actually is a really high risk endeavor, because if you do that consistently, then when you actually do get married and live with someone, there's a lot of baggage you're bringing with you. And how are you able to separate that from previous relationships where you did live with other people? It makes it very tricky, it makes it very sticky. Um, but it is very common. It's the way that the culture is moving towards. And I think there was this thought that, okay, if we try this first, maybe it will actually prevent divorce,
Hmm.
because we can see if we're compatible. Like, let's live together through all 4 seasons, see how we tolerate that, and can we make this work? But something we learned in our premarital counseling is that you're significantly more likely to end up divorced if you lived with your partner prior to getting married. So I guess it sounds okay in theory,
Mm-hmm.
from a cultural standpoint, but it's now proven to not be effective and does go against biblical teaching.
Right. Through like this period of cohabitation and that you had to live through, right? With your parents, um, were there familial patterns, at that point that kind of seemed normal, that because you were living through it, right? You were going through that um, period of time, whether it was tumultuous or whether it was, okay at different at times, whether it was healthy at certain periods, whatever that may be. Um, Looking back, do you have any examples where now you kind of see things a little differently now that you have your own family, and know that that period of whatever patterns that you were living through, should not have been what you've been living through. Rather, it's entirely different now. And now that you have a little bit more of insight, now that you're raising your family and you have a mindset towards building a complete nuclear family.
Actually, no. Like
Mm,
even living through it as a child, you know it doesn't feel right. And
mm,
I'm not really sure if that's from seeing the way that other families function. I don't even think it's that. I think you just inherently know how families should function and how they shouldn't. And I felt very alone in my household growing up. We just didn't, I mean, of course, we took vacations together, we did activities together, but on a daily basis, it was very, very individualistic. Like my everyone would be in a separate room doing their own thing. And I craved for bonding with my family members. And unfortunately, I think over time of consistent disappointment of not getting that, I learned to adjust and be okay on my own. And that has negatively impacted me at this point in my life because that has now become my new normal of, okay, I'll just do it on my own. Okay, I'll just go do that on my own. Okay, I can fix the light by myself when I really can't. I just try to do everything alone. And that is unfortunate that I missed out on like this cohesive, collaborative family unit. And I mean, it has its pros where I know I can depend on myself, but you miss out on the beauty of life where people come together and help one another. So yeah, I think I don't even think, I know I always felt it was not normal. So even looking back, I have the same feelings I did then. And that's why I spent a lot of time at my friends' houses, eating dinner with them and enjoying their family units. But it has definitely had a trickle down effect in my life, from what living like that has caused.
um, right. So, like, when you were going through that period, right? As children, many of us, I mean, at least me, I'll talk about myself, right? I envisioned a certain um way that I would live life when I got married.
Mm-hmm.
I had this like mindset of, oh, I'm gonna, do this. This is what I want. Um, this is the type of lifestyle that I'm gonna try to ensure that I lead with my family. Obviously, we have our own issues, right? Not to say that, my upbringing like didn't have its own challenges. Obviously, I grew up. I was born in India. I moved here, so there's a lot of things there to unpack. If I really get into that, but like there was this vision that I had for myself. Hey, when I get married or when I get older and I have my own family, this is the vision I have for myself. I didn't necessarily have a vision board that I actively like worked on, but it was just in the back of my mind. Um, I'm just curious, like, did you have that? Like, did you know, like, hey, when you envision the future, right, going through whatever you've gone through, whatever challenges that, your upbringing had, what did your, you know, 30-year-old, hey, I'm going to get married, this is what's going to look like? What was that for you?
Yeah, I pretty much envisioned like the house that I grew up in with a nice backyard, with, I don't know, pretty scenery, fenced in backyard, and then like being in the kitchen and cooking and having good family talks and having fun. So it was basically taking my household, but changing what was going on in the inside. So I loved where I grew up. It was very peaceful. And that's kind of what I envisioned, what my life would look like later, but just changing all the dynamics within the house.
Can you elaborate a little bit, like what you mean by changing dynamics? Like what do you like? Are you talking about the relationships that you were like building with your family?
No, like thinking about, getting married and having kids, like just having lighthearted conversations in the home where what I grew up in was very quiet and
Mm,
separated. So like a very cohesive unit. But although all these things are possible, I think as a kid you have these rose colored glasses on of what
mm.
the future will look like, and life's hard, and you don't always feel like having these lighthearted conversations when you get home from working a full day, or the fact that you got a flat tire or a hospital bill because your child was in there with RSV or pneumonia. Like these things you don't think about as a kid that impact your everyday. Um, so I wish that we could create this life that like we envision as kids that is so easy and fun and lighthearted. But unfortunately, that's just not the way that life usually goes on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. If you had to go back, right? I gave you this power that you could, rewind and go back in time. Um, what would you tell, your mom and dad? Right? Like knowing what you know now, knowing what you envision Carmi and our future children um, would be impacted, right? Given, unfortunately, if something happened, what would you tell your parents if you were in, I don't know, what year, 95, 96, I don't know, maybe even a little bit later, 2000?
You mean like what would I tell them about the impact that they were having on me at that time?
Hmm. Exactly. And their relationship itself, like,
I did speak up when I was a kid, and I even remember saying when I was like somewhere between the ages of 7 and 9, I want to say it was closer to 9, asking my parents if they were going to get divorced. Like I could already sense it. I don't even know how I knew what that meant.
mm,
Um, but it was, maybe as a 9-year-old, you don't really speak up as much as you would now as a 33-year-old, but just letting them know that um, it made their dynamic was negatively impacting me, and making me feel unsettled and
mm,
anxious and lonely. And I don't know if it would have made a difference, because there, there's a lot that goes on in a marital relationship, and yes, they're trying to do their best for the kids, but if you're unable to resolve your own issues with your partner, I don't know how much of an impact it would
mm,
make just hearing your child
right.
saying it's
Plead.
hurting me.
Yeah.
Yeah, because as much as you want to resolve that for your kid, it's still so hard when there's marital conflict.
Right.
Um, yeah.
Right. Um, what do you think was missing between them? I mean, clearly they seemed to, if they got married, they loved each other, right? Obviously, life takes its toll.
Mm-hmm.
And agreed, right? There's bills, there's stuff that come your way that you're not able to, sometimes prioritize, your relationship, but something had to be missing. What would you say that was?
I would say, not to be cliche for the podcast, but faith and community.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's a plug. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. Um, very little emphasis on faith. It was all very just, I mean, I learned like the Lord's Prayer. I learned about Jesus, but like knowing what we get from going to church and hearing about other people and what, like, everyone's going through something,
Right.
and just to hear and be constantly reassured that God can help you overcome anything, and just pray about it, pray for your spouse, pray for your situation. I've told numerous friends now that you really need to look for a partner who's strong in faith, because I think if you and I didn't have faith, some of our conflicts could have brought us down at this point. The first year of marriage is, I think, statistically the hardest for everyone.
Right.
Not only did we get married, within that first year, we welcomed our first child. Like, those things are both huge changes. Not to mention, we have cultural differences between us. If it weren't for our faith, I don't know if we would be as strong as we are or able to overcome conflicts or issues. And not only faith, but community. Like, we have reached out to certain family members for mentorship, for guidance that will help us without judgment, without
Right.
choosing a side, without, you know, um, altering their opinion of us, because everyone goes through something and every marriage is difficult.
Mm-hmm.
But without support, and not even just family, but like, we've gotten support from our church too, um, through premarital counseling, through our pastor who married us, continuing to mentor us with his
Mm-hmm.
wife. Without those things, I don't know where we would be. And I think if my parents had had those things and maybe had closer knit relationships with their family or a church group, um, maybe they wouldn't have tried to resolve everything on their own and then just given up because they didn't have the answers. But none of us have all the answers, and we're not supposed to. But it's important to have the faith that some higher power is there with you through every trial and tribulation, and making sure that, your marriage can be for the glory of God.
Yeah. Very well said. That reminds me of our other biblical standing for the specific belief that we have related to nuclear families. Um, Related to the guidance that you get from community, right? It's from Proverbs 11:14. For anyone who'd like to know, it says, where there is no guidance a people falls, but in an abundance of counselors there's safety, right? And that's a beautiful verse that basically identifies that when you don't have the guardrails that any relationship, any whether that's marriage, whether that's even just friendships, right? That you may have, um, they tend to fail. But when you do have voices that are surrounding you, uplifting you, encouraging you, and taking you back and rooting it back to Christ, and what the biblical standing on relationships are, and specifically in a marriage, right? As we learn those different roles that you and I've been talking about as well, um, creates a safety net where you have people to encourage you, push you back, and ensure that you're continuing to work towards one another and getting closer to God at the end of the day. Um, I know you kind of touched on our own relationship. Obviously, being that I grew up here, but I'm no way completely American, right? I still hold on to some of my ethnicity. And one of the things that you mentioned um, about your family was the independence, right? So I want to talk a little bit about the independence and dependence component that it comes to in relationships, right? Specifically around when you are now married to, you know, an Indian man. There is this concept of collective independence that comes with the upbringing that I have, right? Um, how do you think that kind of played into our relationship, right, with things that we have to balance? And of course, this will be something that our child and our future children will have to also observe and see, like, what is that balance that we have to strike between the importance of dependence, but also having your own independence, the right uh, as a person.
Yeah, I think it's made it really hard um, because I was raised to be so independent. Typically, the American household, after a child goes off to college, they don't move back home. You move out on your own, you get a job, and you start supporting yourself. Um, I was always raised to be able to depend on myself. And there's a big benefit to that. Like, had I not found a partner, I know I would have always been taken care of because I did live on my own for so long, and I did know I learned how to navigate adulthood
Mm-hmm.
without having to rely on anyone else. Um, so then when you go from being independent for 30 years, well, from I guess 21 to 30, so for about 9 years, and then getting married and having to learn to be dependent on someone is a very challenging step. It almost feels like regressing. Like, well, I know how to do this,
Right.
or I know how to make decisions. I know how, I know what's right for me, but it's no longer what's right for me. It's what's right for us and our family. And that is a challenging step for me personally. And I want to say that that has been a big reason that marriages are also failing in the United States.
Mm.
I, one, I think it's because people aren't as willing to put in the work.
Right.
When things aren't going well, they're easy to just pull the plug and say, this is too hard. It shouldn't be hard. Marriage is supposed to be easy. You're supposed to complement each other. You're supposed to like
To better
just,
roses.
yeah. And that's that people saying that is a huge disservice to those who get married, because then you're comparing yourself and thinking, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with us? Why do we get in disagreements? But nowhere does it ever say that marriage is easy. And if it's really that easy, I think you're doing it wrong, because are you not pushing each other to be better? Are you not changing within yourself to progress? Like, there's no way it's easy. And then the second part that I think has contributed a lot to the divorce rate is the independence that women have gotten. And I don't want to turn off the viewers at this point. I promise that I think this is valid, but I think for a long time, women were so dependent on men. They weren't working. The men made all of the decisions. They made all of the money. There wasn't as much education for women available. So you had to be dependent on a man. And now that there's this equality movement,
Right.
women are more independent. We're making our own money in a lot of cases and feel empowered to speak up for yourself. they're more likely to walk away from a situation that they don't feel like is serving them.
Mm. Mm.
And in certain situations, I think that that's a good thing. Like if we're talking about an abuse case, like women are feeling empowered to walk away from that and to get help
Mm.
for that. But when it comes to just difference of opinion or that things are difficult, I think that that has served us in the wrong way,
Mm.
where there is a hierarchy within the home, as much as I hate to admit it.
Mm.
Um, and I think my opinion is just as valid as yours is, and it is. But you hold a role and I hold a role. And um, I think it's important to know those roles and for the husband to serve every day, to treat his wife with respect and to provide for his wife and to keep the house running, in every way, like just being the head of the household, being who the kids look as the disciplinary, someone who's strong in leading that home, and a woman who is submissive to her husband. And again, not trying to turn off the viewers, but there's been a misconception in our culture of what
Mm.
submitting to your husband is, and it's not. You don't have an opinion.
Right.
You don't have a say in this.
Right.
Like you have to do whatever your husband says, but there's this level of respect for your husband and knowing, where those roles lie and what your true calling is for the family, because the calling for a husband and a wife are very different in the home.
Right.
And, embrace the nurturing part of you to be the one who's taking care of your husband and your children in those ways. Um, but I've kind of gone off on tangent here, but
No, but
I
I think
do
you're.
think, yeah,
Go ahead. Finish your
I
thought.
think I think that the independence has it has really kind of changed the dynamic of this country, um, and of the family, and
Yeah.
it's difficult to reel that back in.
Agreed. Agreed. I think you laid it out very beautifully. I really resonate and echo um, with your 2 points that you made about um, well, what's been going on. Again, right? Like I think what I'm hearing you say is um, it's not that having independence is a bad thing. It's understanding how it overlaps with, or I guess how biblical roles and responsibilities underpin that is what we need to get acquainted with and get all of ourselves aligned to the word and try to lead a life that is first and foremost dependent on the Lord, right? Because I think the key cap that I've been observing um, is really going back to the word and understanding, that God wants us to more or less depend on Him as primary lead for this family. And I think you beautifully talked about the importance of roles, right? But as a husband, even if I myself have been given this role to lead with sacrificial love for my wife, for my children, I also know that I have to first and foremost honor and respect God and depend on Him, knowing that I don't have all the answers. I might not be able to, um, do certain things that I just haven't been exposed to, right? With, just getting a little bit into my own upbringing, like I come from a very, dependence, and a lot of people like with my, not just my family, but like of Indian ethnicity and Eastern cultures have a dependent lifestyle that they lead. Um, like I depended on my family a lot up until maybe even through college. Like I would say my parents were supporting financially for me, and they did the best that they could to help give me the platform that I have today. and the career and the lifestyle that I've been able to lead was because of their sacrifices, and I always had to depend on them for car, gas money, money to even go out. Like I even though I was working my own summer job, part of my discipline was to give my finances to my dad, and he would, ultimately kind of share that with me when I needed it. And it was helpful because I got to kind of understand the importance of money, where I don't kind of actively go out just because I earn my own dollar. I'm not spending it, just because I have the capability to. So what I'm trying to say is dependence kind of taught me some of the foundational things that I should, um, focus on in areas where perhaps the culture and the country was going somewhere a little bit different. And it was interesting because I do have like classmates and friends that were obviously very independent. They had their own money, they had their own finances that they were able to splurge on. But I always had to go back to my parents to say, "Hey, there's something coming up. Can I, And again, keep in mind, this is in college at this point too. So I know I use that as an example, but there's other things that I had to depend on my family, like up until even in my own college here. I had after college and I was working, I came back home. You moved out and you had your own house. You did very independent things like buying multiple properties, owning, becoming a homeowner, right, at a very young age, which is a testament to to the value of independence, right? But for me, like I had to go back home. I had other priorities that I had to figure out, and when we were coming together, it's a little interesting because like I look up to you in certain ways where I'm like, oh wow, like Dan knows how to do this. Like I can totally depend on Danielle on these areas, and I know that you take it, you know, you can lead it well. Like for example, yesterday you were able to do a lot of our taxes. I just gave you all the paperwork. You're like, all right, Dan, you got this. So you're able to go through it. I know you mentioned you did your taxes growing up, because that's what your mom kind of taught you through that. So yeah, I think as we kind of figure out our own balances as a family with the independence and dependence lifestyle, I'm hoping that it share that our children are able to see the pluses and the negatives of each, right? And I pray that for you and I, we're able to steer and build those guardrails for our own children to know how to navigate through that, because it is a very fine line where you don't want to be too independent, but you do want to make sure that you start with understanding the dependence of God first and foremost, understanding those roles like you highlighted, and then going and finding your own footing, I guess. Um, One question I was thinking about was, how do we ensure that we kind of create that balance, for our children? What do you think? Obviously, our child is just he's still a baby. He's not even 2 yet. So I'm just curious, as we start instilling some of these values, where do you see that fine line being? Where do we draw that line?
Yeah, I don't know if we'll know that until we come across different scenarios. I think it's really hard to say. We're, I'm sure it will illuminate more areas where you were taught to be dependent and I was taught to be independent. Like you said, it's a very fine line to walk and to try to strike a balance.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that there are areas where you wish you were more independent in. And I know that there's areas where I wish I was more dependent in. And I think when those situations arise, I think it will naturally come to us to say, um, you know, let's reel in the independence on this and talk about how you could go about this with like relying on someone else for help. And vice versa. If you're looking at a scenario for our child when he's like 10 or 11 and he would normally just come to you to solve his issues, you could say, why don't you look that up and come back and tell me what you found? Because that kind of establishes some independence, but also dependence as they come back to like have that open dialogue. But it's very difficult for me to answer without a situation right in front of me. But I think that with open collaboration between the two of us, I think we'll be able to hopefully strike a balance.
I want to pivot for a little bit for the time that we have. You talked about community, right? You talked about the importance of having not only like a relationship with God, right? Going back to our conversation with your family, with your parents, right? Having that foundation in Christ, but then the importance of community. For us, for there's a community that Americans have in the sense of what they envision as their community, right? There's as you know, and you've been part of our Indian communities now for the foreseeable past, right? For the recent past, what do you think? Are there differences between the type of communities that we both lead as a different culture? Have you seen any differences or similarities?
I mean, there's definitely differences. But I'm just going off of more so like my own experience. There are definitely American households that are really strong in culture, like Italian Americans, super strong family bonds. I just didn't have that. So there is a heavy influence from the family on your side. They've done a really good job, though, of embracing leaving and cleaving for us, for respecting boundaries that we've established, which is probably a pretty progressive thing for them. Because I want to say in India, it's the grandparents, great grandparents, aunts, uncles, neighbors are all invested in your nuclear. So I very much appreciate the willingness of your family that has come to the States, respecting those boundaries that we've established to make our family how we envision to be the most successful. So that being said, differences would be just the number of engagements that your side of the family chooses to gather for and to celebrate and to just be a part of, and the willingness to drop whatever to be there. And yeah, I would say there's a lot more differences than there are similarities. If I really needed my family, I know that they would show up. Same thing with my friends. And I guess another similarity is that your family has a strong connection with their church and their church community. And we've also established that through accessing small groups through Lighthouse Church. So I think we're taking pieces of our own upbringings and what we're looking for and making our own story and how we plan to navigate this for our own nuclear family, but definitely similarities and differences between the sides.
Agreed. The going to the belief, right? It talks about like the importance of a complete nuclear family being foundational to building future leaders for our communities. So for America and our prayer for America, and more importantly, as we raise our own children to be such leaders, as we instill these concepts of the importance of nuclear family, the importance of these uh, roles within a family. How do you envision um, our children contributing to to their community, to their society?
That's a great question. Um, I hope that we raise our kids to give back, for them to meet needs in the community, for them to be resilient and really motivated. I think that strong leaders in the community don't take no for an answer. They keep pushing, they keep grinding. They just take adversity and use that to become stronger. But they're also humble and
Mm,
really give back. You really, like, if you're constantly taking, you're really not going to be a good leader. You're really not going to be a good contributor to the society. Like, you have to be humble and know how blessed you are and give to those, who are in need. And I think what we're taught is that the more that you do give back, the more generous that you are, the more that God will prosper
hmm
you and help you
hmm
move forward.
Yeah, I think giving back is definitely important. I do pray and hope that our children understand the significance and the importance of the United States, and what this country means for so many around the nation. So many migrants that have came here legally. I want to say legally, and are here working and really driving and adding a lot of value to this country, and more importantly, for all those patriots and all those who have died and served in combat, and to try to protect, defend, you know, the freedoms that we have here, that we so take for granted. And until you really truly go and travel abroad and you understand, what life is, do you then understand what the United States means, and the importance of this country, and the importance of raising future leaders for this country that are, um, you know, morally aligned, um, strong in their faith, and more importantly, give back, right? Which you like rightly pointed out. So, um, as we close out our conversation, again, thank you for a beautiful time. This has been really eye opening, and I'm sure our listeners and viewers gain a lot of value from this. That same question I want to ask you. I gave you an opportunity to travel back in time, so I'm going to give you an opportunity to travel forward in time.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe 2039, 2040, whenever uh, our boy is an adult. What would you like to tell him when he looks back and sees us here, about the importance of a complete family that we're trying to establish for them? And what do you hope for him as he has his own family one day? And yeah.
Well, I hope for him that he finds someone who loves him wholeheartedly, who will help better him, um, for open communication between the two of them, and um, that they really get involved with their community, that they're plugged in with their church, and that they know that they can always come to us for any sort of advice or guidance. And I hope that we establish that type of relationship with our kids and let them know that we're always their biggest fan, always here to support them, always here, when they're in need or when they want to share something great, through thick and thin. I really want to raise them in a very stable household, help them have a secure attachment so
Mm.
that then they can take that into their own relationship and not take as much baggage as, the rest of us bring into relationships. And we always hope for better than we had for ourselves. I can say the same for our parents. They always hoped for better for us than they had.
Agreed.
So that's just, my overall hope is that in 25, 30 years that, he is fine. He has hopefully at that point really accepted his faith. I think that comes fully when you are an adult and you can make that decision on your own. I think we can set that foundation, but ultimately, once you're an adult, to really take control of your own faith and
Mm,
build that relationship on your own and take that and allow that to just overflow in every area of your life and just
amen.
watch the flowers grow and the just everything bloom and just be beautiful from that. But that's where it starts.
Agreed. Yeah, Danielle, this has been a fantastic time. Thank you for jumping on, having this conversation with us. I know we got a little bit, personal, so we appreciate you, opening up a little bit and sharing about your challenges and your childhood a little bit. I know it's we I'm sure you do this with a lot of humility, and I appreciate you sharing that. And I encourage all of our listeners and viewers, think about um, you know the key things that Danielle did share. You know, there is a lot of value in being in community. There's a lot of value in making sure that you align and understand the importance of the biblical roles. Try your best to avoid cohabitation, as we learned from Danielle. And there are obviously other topics we could cover, and maybe one day we'll dive into a little bit more about what the issues of cohabitation perhaps may be. But at a high level, just trust and pray, and continue to pray for um, the right partner from the Lord. I think it starts there. Someone who is sound and is aligned to the Word, and trying to sharpen each other, as the Word says, iron sharpens iron. So having someone that's similarly aligned and like-minded will ultimately uh, push us all to be better for ourselves, but more importantly for our communities around us, and ultimately drive this country forward. Thank you, Danielle, once again.
I really appreciate you having me on. Thank you so much.